How could the scent of orange blossoms clinging to the damp November air outside feel like a mockery? Matteo breathed it in shallowly, the sweetness catching in his throat, mixing unpleasantly with the stale recycled air of the design firm. His fingers worried the worn leather strap of his watch, a nervous habit he couldn't shake. Across the minimalist glass desk, Javier Fuentes, his boss, tapped a sharp, impatient rhythm on a pristine mock-up, the sound echoing Matteo's own frantic heartbeat. "This," Javier clipped out, the single word sharp enough to cut glass, "is not minor, Matteo. This is sloppy. The alignment here," he jabbed a finger, leaving a faint smudge on the glossy print, "throws off the entire balance. Did you even look at the style guide?" Matteo flinched. He had looked. He'd spent hours ensuring every pixel aligned, cross-referencing the dense, ever-changing guide until his eyes burned. But doubt, cold and familiar, seeped in instantly. Had he missed an update? Was he careless? His throat tightened. "See, Javier, I checked it carefully. Perhaps, Javier's voice rose, laced with the weary condescension Matteo dreaded. "Perhaps you were thinking about lunch? About the weekend? This client is crucial. Perhaps doesn't cut it." Matteo's gaze dropped to the offending mock-up, the stark white space suddenly seeming vast and accusing. He wanted to explain, to defend the hours poured into the design, but the words lodged somewhere behind his ribs. Instead, a familiar wave of acquiescence washed over him, easier to absorb the blame, to become small. "You're right, Javier, I apologize. I'll fix it immediately." He kept his voice low, neutral, hoping to shorten the ordeal. His fingers tightened on the watch strap until the buckle dug into his wrist. Javier sighed, a gust of exasperation. "Just do it, and have the revised version on my desk by 3. No excuses." He turned back to his monitor, dismissing Matteo with a finality that left the air thick with unspoken criticism. Matteo retreated, clutching the mock-up like a shield. The scent of expensive coffee brewing somewhere down the hall couldn't mask the bitter taste in his mouth. The renovated historic building, all exposed brick and gleaming chrome near Seville's centre, felt less like a creative hub and more like a beautifully designed pressure cooker. He slid into his chair, the ergonomic mesh suddenly feeling like a cage, the quiet hum of computers amplifying the frantic buzzing in his own head. He just needed to get through the day. The walk home across the Puente de Triana usually calmed him. The Guadalquivir River, grey under the late autumn sky, flowed steadily, a constant presence against the city's bustle. Tonight, though, the familiar view offered little comfort. The weight of Javier's disapproval pressed down, heavy as the damp air. He passed ceramic workshops, their colourful tiles gleaming under the streetlights, a vibrant contrast to the monochrome anxiety churning inside him. Their apartment in Triana was small, but usually felt cosy, filled with Sophia's warmth and the scent of whatever she was cooking. Tonight, silence greeted him. Sophia sat curled on the sofa, nursing a glass of wine, the television murmuring ignored in the corner. Her usual vibrant energy was muted, replaced by a tension that tightened the lines around her mouth. "Hola," Matteo offered, trying for cheerful and landing somewhere near hesitant. "Hola," she replied without looking up. Her tone was flat. He hovered near the doorway, unsure how to proceed. He knew that look. Something was wrong, likely stemming from her demanding job as a nurse at the Virgin del Rocío hospital. But asking often felt like poking a sleeping bear. He opted for the safer route. "Long day?" Sophia took a slow sip of wine. "You could say that." A pause stretched, thick with unspoken things. "Did you remember to call the landlord about the leak?" Matteo's stomach clenched. He hadn't. Javier's critique had driven everything else from his mind. "Ah, no, lo siento, it completely slipped my mind after work." Sophia finally looked at him, her dark eyes sharp. "Slipped your mind? Matteo, the bucket in the bathroom is almost full again. Are we just going to live with a drip forever because you forget?" The edge in her voice wasn't anger, not yet, but brittle frustration. "No, of course not," he said quickly, feeling defensive. Javier was difficult today. I got distracted." He hated using work as an excuse, but it was the truth, or part of it. "Javier is always difficult," Sophia sighed, turning back to the TV. "Some days everything just feels like too much." The comment hung in the air, aimed vaguely at the world, but landing squarely in the space between them. Matteo wanted to bridge that space, to ask what everything entailed, but the memory of Javier's dismissal, coupled with Sophia's current coolness, paralyzed him. He retreated to the kitchen, ostensibly to find something to eat, but really just to escape the suffocating silence. He leaned against the counter, the cold tile a small shock through his thin sweater. Why was it so hard? Why did saying the right thing, or anything at all, feel like navigating a minefield? He fiddled with his watch strap, the worn leather a small, familiar anchor in a sea of unease. "You look like something the cat dragged in, Matteo Carino," Isabella announced the following Saturday, sliding onto the stool opposite him at their usual tapas bar near the Alameda de Hercules. She flagged down the waiter with practiced ease. "Dos cañas, por favor, y unas aceitunas." Isabella Ramirez was Matteo's oldest friend, fiercely loyal and unapologetically direct. She worked as a freelance translator, a job that seemed to grant her a level of freedom Matteo envied. She surveyed him critically, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Javier again, or is it Sophia this time?" Matteo managed a weak smile. "A bit of both, I think." He picked at a loose thread on the paper napkin. "Let me guess," Isabella continued, accepting the small glasses of beer. "Javier breathed fire, you apologized for existing, and Sophia sighed dramatically about the state of the universe, and you tiptoed around each other like frightened mice." He winced. It wasn't quite like that. Wasn't it? She took a long sip of her beer. "Matteo, I love you, but you let people walk all over you. This Javier sounds like a nightmare. Why don't you just tell him where to stick his critiques?" "Because he's my boss, Issa, and I need this job," Matteo countered, feeling a familiar surge of defensiveness. "It's not that simple." "And Sophia?" Isabella pressed, softening slightly. "You two used to talk about everything. Now, it's like you're afraid to breathe the same air sometimes." "She's stressed," Matteo mumbled. "Her job is intense. And yours isn't. Matteo, everyone gets stressed. That doesn't give her the right to snap at you, and it doesn't mean you have to absorb it all like some kind of emotional sponge. You have needs too, you know. It's okay to say, 'Hey, that wasn't fair,' or 'I'm feeling overwhelmed too.'" He knew she was right, intellectually. But the thought of initiating such conversations sent a jolt of panic through him. Conflict felt dangerous, unpredictable. His childhood role as the family peacekeeper, navigating between a volatile older brother and demanding parents, had taught him that silence was safety. A disastrous project failure at a previous job, where a misunderstood brief he'd been too afraid to clarify had cost the company a major client, had only cemented that fear. Confrontation led to disaster. Avoidance felt like survival. "I don't know how," he admitted quietly, staring into his beer. "Every time I think about saying something, my throat closes up. I just freeze." Isabella reached across the small table, her hand warm on his arm. "Maybe you just need some tools, Carino. Some different ways to handle it. Because this," she gestured vaguely at his tired posture, "isn't working for you." Her words echoed in his mind later that evening. "Isn't working for you." He sat alone in the living room, Sophia having gone to bed early with a headache. The dripping sound from the bathroom bucket seemed unnaturally loud. He pulled out his phone, vaguely searching for articles on stress management, workplace conflict, anything. He scrolled past generic advice until a title caught his eye. "Beyond Avoidance, Practical Phrases for Difficult Conversations." He hesitated, then clicked. The article talked about understanding the root of irritability, stress, insecurity, fear, and offered simple, specific phrases designed not to win an argument, but to de-escalate, validate, and open doors for understanding. Phrases like, "I understand this is frustrating for you," or "What happened today?" It felt different, less confrontational, more constructive. Could something so simple actually work? A tiny, fragile seed of hope took root amidst the weeds of his anxiety. The opportunity, or rather the necessity, to try came sooner than expected. Monday morning brought a new crisis. The server hosting their client proofs had crashed overnight. Javier, already wound tight about the upcoming pitch presentation for a potentially huge new client, Bodegas Torres, was practically vibrating with tension. Unbelievable. Javier paced his office, running a hand through his already impeccably styled hair, messing it up for once. "The IT department assures me soonest possible resolution." What does that even mean? Hours? Days? The Torres pitch is in 3 days. We need those final proofs reviewed yesterday. Matteo stood in the doorway, feeling the familiar urge to shrink away. Javier wasn't yelling at him precisely, but the entire office felt charged with his frantic energy. Mateo's instinct was to murmur agreement, offer apologies for the universe's failings and escape. But Isabella's words, and the article he'd bookmarked, echoed in his mind. Understand the route. Validate. Javier wasn't angry at him. He was panicked about the deadline, the client, the potential failure. Taking a deep, unsteady breath, Mateo stepped fully into the office. His heart hammered against his ribs. Javier, he began, his voice slightly hoarse. He cleared his throat. Javier, I understand your frustration. He focused on keeping his tone calm, mirroring the technique described. The timing with the Torres pitch is incredibly tight, and this server issue creates real pressure. He used the word pressure instead of problem, hoping it sounded more empathetic. Javier stopped pacing. He looked at Mateo, a flicker of surprise in his sharp eyes. The frantic energy didn't disappear, but the sharp edge seemed momentarily blunted. Pressure? It's a disaster, Mateo, a complete disaster. Okay, validation acknowledged, but not entirely effective yet. Mateo remembered another point. Shift focus slightly, offer collaborative stance if possible. It's definitely a major obstacle, Mateo agreed, careful not to downplay Javier's feeling. I've already contacted IT again for a specific ETA. While we wait, could we perhaps review the static versions we printed last Friday? We could identify any purely visual changes needed, so we're ready the moment the server is back online. He tried to sound solution-oriented, not just sympathetic. Javier considered this, rubbing his temples. The printed versions? Yes, all right. Not ideal, but better than sitting here tearing our hair out. He gestured towards Mateo's workstation. Bring them in. Let's focus on what we can control. Mateo retreated, his legs feeling slightly shaky, but also strangely buoyant. It wasn't a miraculous transformation. Javier was still stressed, still demanding, but he hadn't snapped. He hadn't dismissed Mateo. He had listened, even if briefly, and accepted a suggestion. Mateo hadn't felt that crushing wave of personal failure. He'd navigated the moment, not perfectly, but better. He allowed himself a small internal sigh of relief. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't impossible. The watch strap remained untouched on his wrist. That small victory fueled a cautious optimism. He needed to try again, this time closer to home. The opportunity arose a few evenings later. Sophia arrived home late from the hospital, her face etched with exhaustion. She dropped her bag heavily by the door, kicked off her shoes and slumped onto the sofa without a word. The air around her felt heavy, charged with the day's accumulated stress. Usually, Mateo would busy himself in the kitchen, giving her space, waiting for the storm cloud to pass or dissipate on its own. Tonight, remembering the article's advice on empathetic inquiry, he took a different approach. He poured her a glass of water and brought it over, sitting down not directly beside her, but close enough to feel companionable. He waited a moment, letting the silence settle. Then, softly, he asked, Sophia, you seem really worn out tonight. He kept his tone gentle, observational rather than demanding. Was it a particularly difficult day at the hospital? Sophia didn't respond immediately. She stared at the glass of water in her hands, her shoulders slumped. Mateo held his breath, resisting the urge to fill the silence, to guess what might be wrong, to offer solutions. He just waited. Finally, she let out a long, shuddering sigh. Difficult doesn't even begin to cover it, Mateo. Her voice was low, thick with fatigue. We were short-staffed again, had an emergency admission that went badly, complicated family situation on top of it. She paused, then looked at him, her eyes glistening slightly. And then, Doctor, Ramirez was questioning my judgment on a medication dosage in front of everyone. Mateo's instinct was to jump in, defend her, rage against the unfairness, but he forced himself to just listen, nodding slightly to show he was hearing her. He remembered the article. Don't fix, just acknowledge. That sounds incredibly stressful, he said quietly, dealing with short staffing, a tough case, and being undermined publicly. That's a lot for one shift. He tried to reflect back the specific pressures she'd mentioned. A single tear escaped and tracked down Sophia's cheek. She didn't brush it away. It was, she whispered. Sometimes I just feel like I'm drowning there. She took a shaky sip of water. The conversation didn't magically solve her problems, but the tension that had crackled in the air upon her arrival seemed to soften, replaced by a quiet vulnerability. She leaned her head back against the sofa cushions, closing her eyes for a moment. Matteo reached out tentatively and rested his hand on her arm. She didn't pull away. They sat in silence for a while longer, but it wasn't the strained, avoidant silence of before. It felt different, shared, understood. He hadn't offered solutions or platitudes. He had simply asked, listened, and acknowledged her reality. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were truly connecting through the stress, rather than being pushed apart by it. A warmth spread through his chest, chasing away some of the lingering chill from the office. This felt more significant than the interaction with Javier. This felt like rebuilding a bridge. Progress wasn't a straight line. Matteo found himself mentally rehearsing phrases before potentially difficult interactions, sometimes sounding stilted or unnatural when he tried them out loud. He started noticing irritability more acutely, not just in Javier and Sofia, but in the impatient driver honking in Seville's notorious traffic, the curt shop assistant, even his own flicker of annoyance when Isabella pushed him too hard. He realized how much of it stemmed from feeling unheard, pressured, or simply overwhelmed. He tried perspective shifting with Sofia one weekend when they discovered the bathroom leak, previously just a drip, had worsened significantly overnight, leaving a damp patch spreading across the antique tiles. Sofia's immediate reaction was frustration. "Madre mia, this is a disaster. The landlord will take forever and these tiles will be ruined." Matteo felt his own surge of dismay but caught himself before spiraling. He took a breath. Okay, this is definitely worse than before, and it's incredibly annoying. Validation. But, he paused, searching for a positive angle, however small. At least we discovered it now, before it caused major damage downstairs. And we already have the landlord's direct number, right? Maybe he'll be quicker this time. Perspective shift offering alternative. Sofia looked at the spreading damp patch, then at Matteo, her frustration still evident but slightly less panicked. Maybe, she conceded doubtfully. Okay, vai, let's call him now and put down more towels. The crisis wasn't averted, but the immediate emotional flare-up was contained. They tackled the practicalities together, a team against the leak rather than against each other. His attempts with Javier remained a mixed bag. Sometimes validating Javier's stress before presenting information seemed to smooth the interaction. Other times, Javier seemed impervious, barreling ahead with his demands regardless of Matteo's careful phrasing. Matteo learned that persistence was key, and sometimes a simple, calm statement of fact or a clearly defined boundary was necessary, though terrifying to implement. He had a setback during a team meeting about the tourist pitch. Under pressure, with Javier firing questions rapidly, Matteo fumbled an answer. Javier's sharp sigh of impatience triggered Matteo's old reflex. He mumbled an apology and fell silent, letting another colleague jump in. Afterwards, he felt a familiar wave of self-criticism. He'd frozen again. He confessed his frustration to Isabella over cloudy glasses of Manzanilla sherry at a bar tucked away in Santa Cruz. "I thought I was getting better at this, Isa, but one sharp look from Javier and I just..." shut down. Isabella swirled the pale sherry in her glass. "Matteo, learning a new skill takes practice. You wouldn't expect to play flamenco guitar perfectly after one lesson, would you? You had decades of practice being the quiet one. It takes time to unlearn that. The important thing is, you realized you shut down. You're aware now. That's huge." She leaned forward. "So what could you have done differently in that meeting, knowing what you know now?" He thought about it. "Maybe." Take a breath. Acknowledge his question, even if I didn't have the immediate answer. Say something like, "That's a key point, Javier. Let me just pull up the exact figures for that." Buy himself a moment to think instead of reacting with panic. "Exactly," Isabella beamed. "See? You know what to do. Now you just need to keep practicing until it becomes more automatic than the freezing." Her unwavering belief was a balm. He left the bar feeling less like a failure and more like a work in progress. The path was uneven, but he was still moving forward. The tourist pitch presentation loomed, casting a long shadow over the office. Javier's baseline stress level ratcheted up daily, his demands becoming sharper, his patience thinner. He scheduled endless review meetings, scrutinizing every slide, every word choice. Matteo found himself bracing before each interaction, consciously deploying his new strategies like shields. Simultaneously, a personal decision pressed down on him and Sofia. Her parents, living in a village outside Córdoba, were planning their silver wedding anniversary celebration. They desperately wanted Sofia and Mateo there for the entire weekend, but it clashed directly with a long-planned getaway Mateo and Sofia had booked, their first real holiday in over a year, intended to recharge and reconnect after months of stress. Sofia felt torn, obligated to her parents but deeply needing the break. Mateo felt the weight of her conflict, and his own desire for the holiday felt selfish in comparison. It was a conversation they kept circling, both hesitant to voice their true feelings for fear of disappointing the other. The day before the Torres presentation was peak chaos. Javier called Mateo into his office, his face grim. The client just requested a last-minute change to the budget breakdown slides. They want 3 different scenarios projected. It needs to be done by morning. Mateo's mind raced. It was nearly 7 p.m. This was hours of intricate work. "Okay," he said, keeping his voice steady. He started to formulate a validating response. "I understand this adds pressure," but Javier cut him off. "Don't just say okay, Mateo. Do you understand the complexity? This requires rerunning all the projections." Javier's voice was tight with anxiety, his fear of failure palpable. Mateo felt the familiar urge to shrink, to simply promise the impossible. Instead, he took a deliberate breath. He met Javier's stressed gaze directly. "I understand the request, Javier, and the complexity involved validation. Projecting 3 scenarios accurately will take several hours." He paused, then stated the reality calmly but firmly. "To do it properly and ensure accuracy for the presentation, I will need to focus solely on this tonight. I can have it ready by 8 a.m. tomorrow." Setting a realistic boundary expectation. Javier stared at him, seemingly thrown off by the lack of immediate panicked agreement. He chewed his lip. "Accuracy is paramount," he conceded gruffly. "Fine, 8 a.m. Make sure it's flawless." He turned back to his screen, the dismissal less sharp than usual, almost thoughtful. Mateo left, not feeling victorious but feeling solid. He hadn't been swept away by Javier's panic. He'd held his ground calmly and professionally. He arrived home late, emotionally drained, but also strangely energized by the small act of self-assertion. Sofia was waiting up, the brochure for their planned getaway lying on the coffee table between them like an accusation. The conversation about her parents' anniversary could no longer be avoided. "My mother called again," Sofia said quietly, tracing the outline of a sunny beach on the brochure. "She was insistent." Mateo sat beside her. His own fatigue warred with the need to handle this delicately. He wanted the holiday desperately, but he saw the conflict in Sofia's eyes. He started with empathy. "I hear how much pressure you're feeling from your parents, Sofia. It puts you in a difficult position." She nodded, relief flickering in her expression. "It does. I feel so guilty even thinking about missing it. But, Mateo, I need this break. We need this break." Her voice was barely a whisper. Now it was his turn to be honest, to state his own needs without minimizing hers. "I need it too, Sofia," he admitted. "This year has been incredibly demanding for both of us. For me," he took another breath, "it's important that we protect that time for ourselves to reconnect." Tears welled in Sofia's eyes again, but this time they felt different. Less stress, more emotion. "But my parents, how can we find a solution that works for both of us?" Mateo asked gently, echoing a phrase he'd practiced internally. "Could we go to the anniversary dinner itself, but not stay the whole weekend? Or maybe plan a separate, dedicated visit to your parents very soon after our trip?" Collaborative problem-solving. They talked for a long time, exploring options, acknowledging the validity of both the family obligation and their personal need for respite. There were no easy answers, but the conversation itself felt like a breakthrough. They were navigating the conflict together, openly and honestly, without resorting to blame or withdrawal. By the time they finally reached a compromise, attending the main anniversary event but keeping their holiday, Mateo felt a profound sense of relief. It wasn't just about the holiday. It was about the fact that they could have this conversation. They could face difficult choices together. The Torres presentation arrived like a storm front, palpable energy, high stakes, and the potential for things to go spectacularly wrong. Mateo stood beside Javier in the sleek, intimidating conference room of the Bodegas Torres headquarters. the Seville skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The air hummed with anticipation and Javier's barely concealed nerves. He kept adjusting his tie, smoothing his jacket. As Mateo set up the laptop, Javier leaned in, his voice a low, urgent hiss. "Remember, Mateo, stick to the script on the budget slides. No deviations and project confidence." Mateo nodded, his own heart thudding against his ribs. He felt the old anxiety prickle, the urge to become invisible. But then he recalled the late-night work, the conversation with Sophia, the small victories. He wasn't the same person who had frozen in that meeting weeks ago. The presentation began smoothly. Javier, despite his nerves, was a polished presenter when talking about the creative concepts. Then came the budget section, Mateo's part. He took his place, clicking to the first of the newly created scenario slides. Immediately, one of the senior Torres executives interrupted, a sharp-eyed woman named Senora Alvarez. "Forgive me, Senor Mateo, but this projection seems optimistic. What assumptions underpin Scenario B regarding market penetration in the Asian sector?" It was a challenging question, digging deeper than the prepared script allowed. Mateo saw Javier tense beside him, opening his mouth to jump in. But Mateo held up a hand slightly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of control. He met Senora Alvarez's gaze directly. "That's an excellent question, Senora Alvarez," he began, his voice remarkably steady. He felt a flicker of panic, but pushed it down. He knew this data inside out after the previous night's marathon session. "Scenario B assumes a faster adoption rate based on..." He paused, took a breath, and calmly walked her through the specific market analysis and competitor data points supporting the projection, referencing the appendix slide where the raw data was detailed. He didn't rush, didn't apologize, didn't deflect. He simply answered the question thoroughly and factually, calm, clear information delivery under pressure. When he finished, there was a brief silence. Senor Alvarez nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I see. Thank you for the clarification, Senor Mateo. That provides necessary context." Javier remained silent beside him, his expression unreadable. Mateo continued through the remaining budget slides, handling 2 more pointed questions with the same calm clarity. He focused on the data, on presenting the information effectively, managing his own internal monologue, which screamed, "You're going to mess this up," by focusing on his breathing and the facts in front of him. The rest of Rala's presentation concluded without major incident. As they packed up, Javier clapped Mateo briefly on the shoulder. It wasn't praise exactly, but it wasn't criticism either. It felt like acknowledgement. "Good job handling Alvarez's questions," Javier said gruffly, avoiding eye contact as he gathered his papers. "You knew your numbers." Coming from Javier, it was practically a standing ovation. Walking out into the bright Seville sunshine, Mateo felt lighter than he had in months. The anxiety hadn't vanished entirely. It was a familiar companion, after all, but it no longer held the reins. He had faced the pressure, navigated the difficult questions, and managed not only Javier's potential reactions, but his own internal storm. He hadn't just survived. He'd performed competently, confidently even. Life didn't magically become perfect. Javier Fuentes remained a demanding boss, prone to stress-induced impatience. Sophia still had incredibly tough days at the hospital that left her drained and occasionally sharp-tongued. The difference was Mateo. He no longer felt like a helpless ship tossed on the waves of others' moods. He had learned to navigate. He continued to practice. Validating Javier's pressure before discussing project realities became more automatic. Asking Sophia, "What happened today?" Or "How can we tackle this together?" When she seemed overwhelmed, became a natural part of their dynamic,